Hi, I'm Christian Sprenger. I'm the DP of Widows Bay, and you're listening to the Cinematography Podcast. In that sequence, there's like him running up this spiral staircase, and it was like, I don't know, a $100,000 set to build for this like one shot, and we just were like, and the poor line producer was like, please, is there any way that we could just like shoot it on stairs and then green screen it? And we were like, no, it has to be real.
This is Cinepod, the Cinematography Podcast, a program about the art, craft, and philosophy of the moving image presented by Hot Rod Cameras. I'm your host, Alana Cody. Today on our show, we speak with Christian Sprenger, the cinematographer behind Atlanta and Mr. and Mrs. Smith. His latest work is on Widows Bay, the hit Apple TV horror comedy created by Katie Dippold. Christian was the lead DP and a producer on the series. We dive into how Christian's 11-year creative partnership with executive producer and director Hiro Murai has built a shared shorthand, allowing him to pitch unconventional ideas with total trust. Why the team resisted moody, shadow-heavy horror lighting in favor of bright, high-key images inspired by Jaws in some episodes and The Shining in others. Contrast and realism do the dramatic work instead of obvious genre inspirations. The team's commitment to practical effects over VFX shortcuts and how that craft translates to audiences. How Episode 6 became a deliberate break in format and what it took to convince guest director Ty West to shoot within those constraints. After the interview, stick around for our short ends, our pet obsessions of the week. But first, find out what's going on in the world of entertainment in our segment called Close Focus.
All right, it is our Close Focus time of the show. It's the time we talk about what's going on in Hollywood. Wow, there was a lot of things that went on this week, and there's a article in the Hollywood Reporter, which we'll reference in the show notes, that is entitled "Hollywood and Big Tech Are Preparing for War." Ben, do you want to give us the short version of what this article is about?
The call is coming from inside the house. Have we noticed that big tech has already kind of taken everything over like 15 years ago anyway? You know, like we have Apple and Amazon and Netflix and all these tech companies. And I've not complained, but I've certainly spoken about it vocally on this podcast over the years about how tech has come in and tried to do what tech does, you know, to move fast and break things. But one of the big things was actually more of an entertainment move to tech. This is like entertainment strikes tech, and that's Fox bought Roku. Fox bought Roku. And you know, it's interesting because Fox doesn't really have a streaming presence. It's not really, you know, like the Fox Studios was bought by Disney, so Simpsons and all that stuff is on Disney Plus, and you know, Fox News and all that stuff. They Fox Sports, they're not really a streaming company, but now they own the biggest streaming company, you know, outside of Netflix. I don't know even know if you can compare it, because Roku makes the devices and the TVs. I have a Roku TV. It's the most common operating system. It would be like if somebody bought Windows. They didn't want if Dell bought Windows, then suddenly they would be, you know, in charge of the infrastructure of how people interface with computers. That's kind of what Roku is, would you say?
Yeah, you know, it's interesting because there is a lot of people who use Roku. There's a lot of people who use Amazon. There's all of these different smart TVs with their own things built into it. But Roku is a dominant player in the space and has a ton of subscribers, a ton of people who use their system as their way to interact with all of the different apps that the different companies possess.
And they spent, by the way, $22 billion for the privilege. Fox basically, when, you know, you and me and anyone else with a Roku TV turns on their TV, Fox is basically going to own the first thing you see every time. And there's a lot of advertising that happens on that front page. So they might just be trying to chisel in on that action. Maybe they can make, I don't know, 22 billion is a lot to make back, but I feel like they can also cross promote and advertise their own stuff and push us towards, you know, basically Fox News, Fox Sports, Fox whatever.
Well, let's not forget, though, that YouTube is currently the largest media company in the world by dollars being generated, and they made $60 billion. Of course, YouTube is actually Google, and this is also featured heavily inside of the Hollywood Reporter article, and it also goes on to explain how Meta, which owns Instagram, they generate $50 billion in advertising revenue. So all of this is more than the Paramount, Skydance, Warner Brothers, the NBC Universals combined.
So all the stuff that we obsess about is chicken feed to these tech giants.
But what's particularly interesting is that the tech giants seem to want to push more than into traditional entertainment and Hollywood, whereas there is an investment currently happening right now between Google, which also owns YouTube, now in Studio A24, which is mentioned in this article. Also, Meta, which owns Instagram, says they are going to get into horizontal video, which, horizontal video.
Yeah, it's a bold experiment on Instagram's part to try horizontal programming. I mean, if only there was some data set that they could reference to see if you could even tell a story horizontally, like all of television since the 1950s, like it's, 90 years of television, 80 years of television. But yeah, I mean, it's interesting to me, but also, Instagram was, originally Instagram video was 1x1, so it was just a flat square, and then they moved into the vertical for, their, what do they call them, the shorts or whatever, and reels, that's what they call them, and now they're gonna go. So now they're gonna own 9x16, 16x9, and 1x1. Good for you, Instagram.
The subtitle of this Hollywood Reporter article is Meta wants to steal TV viewers, Amazon and Apple are meddling with content, and traditional media companies are pursuing mega deals to try and survive. I don't know if all of that is exactly true, because I don't really feel like the traditional companies are just barely hanging on to survive right now. Things have changed and shifted, but these are massive, massive organizations with the ability to reinvent and change and do all kinds of stuff because they have so much money. So war, sure, there is going to be a lot of competition happening now. What exactly the viewers want remains to be seen. I don't know. Alana, how do you feel about all this?
Well, also, I was going to add that there is some censorship happening, though, too, with companies like Amazon, because they recently dropped, in the article, it goes on to talk about there's a Luca Guadagnino film.
Oh, yeah.
About the CEO, Sam Altman of OpenAI.
Yeah.
And it was dropped after Amazon recently signed a multi-billion-dollar deal with OpenAI. So no other companies have picked it up. And apparently it was most of the way through production. So I think that it becomes a loop of, nobody's going to want to pick up the hard look at, tech that might need to happen if they are all, interested in getting into the entertainment space.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing. And I mean, I often wonder about this stuff because I feel like, these tech companies are dealing with so much more money than the entertainment industry is capable of generating. I mean, when you look at, as industries go, if you compare us to, textiles or, pharmaceuticals or whatever, the entertainment industry is kind of a pipsqueak in terms of how much, like we're making billions and these companies are making tens and hundreds of billions of dollars every year, and we're lucky if we crack like 4 or 5 billion a year, theatrical plus, whatever's going on TV, which I'm sure, I don't know. It's significant, but it's not, it doesn't take over the world. But what's interesting is I think that Hollywood,
it's no oil.
But Hollywood writes the story that culture remembers, and so time after time, whoever is leading in the industrial world at any given time comes in and tries to buy out Hollywood and tries to control it, because to control Hollywood, I think, is to control the message and sort of the historical record looking back. How many people would look at The Social Network as an accurate representation of how Facebook was founded? And I think that, you can go all the way back to Orson Welles and Citizen Kane and how he, portrayed William Randolph Hearst in that movie. And, it's like William Randolph Hearst, Orson Welles was a nothing pipsqueak to William Randolph Hearst, but William Randolph Hearst took the time out of his day to squash him. And that's what these companies can do. But also a lot of these companies want to own that space. Does Apple need Apple TV? If Apple shut down Apple TV Plus and all the feature films that they did tomorrow, it's not going to really impact their bottom line. They want that seat at that table. That's what they want. It's the cool kids table. I think that's all it is.
It is, and actually, I mean, I have to say, like they've been crushing it with the stuff they've been making.
100%. I mean, look at what we're talking about today. Look at who you interviewed today. But that being said, you know, a lot of these companies, and it's been remarked repeatedly, you know, Amazon, Apple, like these companies don't require entertainment to be a part of what they do to make a living, as compared to Netflix, which is still a technology company, but like their whole product is entertainment. Apple, it's like, you know, I don't know how much of the pie chart of Apple is entertainment, but I'm guessing iPhones are significantly a lot more of what Apple's making than awesome television shows.
I think you bring up a really good point, Ben. Actually, I just want to expand on it slightly because, like, if you look at whoever is sort of in control of the world or in control of a certain segment of the economy, at some point, it seems like a lot of them want to get into entertainment. And I'm thinking about just like the previous ownerships of some of the studios, including Coca-Cola owning Columbia Pictures,
AOL, Time Warner.
Seagram's owning Universal.
I mean, Sony
Panasonic
Pictures
owning
still owns
Universal.
Sony Pictures, but it was kind of
They
a big
do,
deal
but-
when they bought Columbia Pictures.
They did,
So
yeah.
it's different. It's different depending on who it is. It's just that at this point here, there's a whole lot of nerds in Silicon Valley that have all decided that they want to play with the cool kids in Hollywood, and look what we got.
As long as the cool kids don't make a movie about them that makes them look like uncool kids, Sam Altman.
Exactly. Yeah. But it's interesting because really, if you think about it, it kind of works because, like, you know, people have warm and fuzzy feelings about A24, and now Google wants to, like,
Co-opt them.
And can I say, by the way, like originally, we should tell our listeners, Alana, you sent us an article about A24's
I did.
$70 million partnership with Open Mind from Google.
75. Yeah,
and
DeepMind.
And
Yeah.
we were going to talk about that. All three of us read the article, and it's like Google's giving A24 $70 million. None of us could tell based on these articles what the fuck
For.
they're going to do with it. Like they're not using the movies as training data. They're like training their workflow. And I'm like, what? Accounting?
I've heard stories, rumblings through the grapevine of people who've seen some of the stuff that DeepMind is working on. DeepMind, Google really wants to be able to generate movies. They really want to be able to, they supposedly have people working on narrative production inside. It's all very, very secret. I have heard it's also really crappy. It looks very visually, but the storytelling is not particularly compelling.
That.
Which, what a surprise. And then, yes, so they're spending more money to try to figure it out. I don't think that this is how you figure it out, but it's
so much cheaper to hire a writer. Although, you know, I feel like based on some of the stuff I've seen lately, like Jeff Bezos would be like, do you know how much water it takes to grow a writer? AI uses far less water than a writer.
But, you know, I guess like I was saying too, I mean, like just talking about Apple, you know, it's like, do I have better feelings about Apple because I've been enjoying their programming lately? I would say I do. You know, and so maybe that's part of it. It kind of becomes part of their PR.
I think that's
people,
it's a strong point.
Yeah. I mean, you know, people are like, oh, but they make great shows, you know, so they can't be that bad.
Yeah. Did I like Coca-Cola more because of Ghostbusters? Maybe. It's possible. So.
Well, I mean, you know, when they do studies about stuff like that, it works. So, you know.
It's really interesting to see what's happening in this space. It will not be boring for the conceivable future. So yeah, it's
true.
It's going to keep changing.
Yes. All right. Should we get to the interview?
Sure. So we have my interview coming up next with Christian Sprenger, who is the DP of Widow's Bay.
Kick ass.
Today, I'm joined by Christian Sprenger, the DP of Widow's Bay, and several other shows that I love. So it's really exciting to get to speak with you. And so welcome to the Cinematography Podcast.
Thank you very much. Happy to be here.
Great. So to begin with, you've been, you know, the DP for Hiro Murai on since Atlanta, I think, right? And was that like 10 years ago?
Yeah, I think we've just hit 11 years. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. So tell me a little bit about like your collaboration with Hiro and like what brought you guys together and you know, kind of how that evolved and what it's like to collaborate. I'm sure you guys probably
Mhm.
have developed a nice little shorthand.
We have, yes. Um, yeah, so Hero and I met, I think probably in like 2008 or 2009. We were both kind of freshly out of film school, and everyone was sort of like helping each other out on little projects here and there. And I had gotten a phone call from a friend to come shoot second unit for or pick up reshoots for a Nokia commercial. And I just like showed up with a camera and some gear to on a call sheet, and showed up, and Hero was the director, and it was like very cordial, like, hey, nice to meet you, what are we doing today? And then we sort of like kind of stayed sort of socially in touch through, like, I guess the music video scene and like East Side Los Angeles filmmaker scene, and just kind of like, we had a lot of the same friends and worked with a lot of the same little production companies, um, and yeah, and then he kind of like hit this point where all of a sudden he just started doing like some really provocative kind of like outstanding music videos, and all of a sudden I was like, oh my god, like this guy, how'd this guy get so good so quick? and and yeah, and then I think he and Donald had done a short film kind of leading up to doing Atlanta, and neither of them had really worked in this type of like showrunner, producer, show creator, executive producer kind of role in television before, and or it really in narrative before at all. And they had sold the pilot to FX, and I had done probably three pilots at that point with FX, and was sort of friendly with some of the folks at the executive level. And I think that someone just kind of passed my name along, um, and then I think like both Hero and Donald sort of like loosely knew me, and that was how I like got the interview, and how we started talking. And in on the pilot, Hero had really not done any narrative at all other than this like one little short film. And so I think in some ways, like maybe in FX's mind, I was like the one person in the room who at least they knew that I could execute a pilot, and I like knew how to shoot coverage and that type of stuff. But then as soon as I got in the room with Donald and Hero, I was like, let's not do anything that we normally would do on television. Like, let's do something totally different. And I was also like, 8 or 9 years into shooting television, and I think I had also gotten kind of like pretty bored, and like I think I had hit a point where I was like, I don't want to go do like episodic TV on network, and just make sort of like cookie cutter stuff. And so I think we were all just like at this moment, we were all luckily kind of like aligned creatively, that we sort of wanted to like subvert the format. And Donald is like this incredible like person of incredible confidence, and nothing like really phases him, and he's not like overly precious about anything. And so he like sat us down and was like, let's not care about making any decisions that are going to like help us get the show picked up, or that are going to like guarantee that the studio is going to be happy. Like, let's just make something for the three of us, that the three of us think is cool, and that we believe in, and that we think is good. And if no one else likes it, then who cares? And that was like such an incredibly like freeing beginning foundational sort of philosophy for that show. And then weirdly that kind of became the sort of like philosophical foundation of like all of the three of our relationship, and really the like kind of language that we started building on that show, and that we've continued building on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, and that Hero and I have kind of continued building on all his other projects. um so yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of a rare thing, especially in television, to have that be sort of a philosophy of how to make something. But it's incredibly freeing.
I think too, you were lucky to have like a network like FX, which at the time was willing to take
100%.
chances, and
Yes.
so
Yeah, FX was at this like incredible point too, where they had like, they had done like Louis. I had just done this episode, season one of the show Baskets. They were kind of like they had done better things. Like there were these like kind of weird left of center, kind of like almost like borderline experimental, like, and it was a lot of it was all happening in the like kind of half hour comedy space. And I think that they were like, whoa, we're like making these cheap shows and they're really hitting well. And like, we kind of like let create, like Louis, I think sort of like set the pace for like giving like half as much money to a show creator and then letting them kind of like go have a lot more autonomy than you normally would on in a normal like television structure. And they got an incredible show out of it. And so I think they were like at this point where they're like, yeah, let's like trust some filmmakers. And I think that in a lot of ways that has like sort of built what FX is today and what everyone like loves and respects about FX from an audience perspective and from like a creator perspective.
yeah, sure. I mean, even though now it's like under Hulu, I you still watch like almost anything that's still like under that rubric, I guess you could say.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So then, as far as Widow's Bay goes, like what happened with that project? How did that occur?
So Hiro had brought Widow's Bay. I think he had brought Widow's Bay. So Katie had brought Widow's Bay to Hiro. Hiro had brought it to FX. I think FX was didn't think that they were right for it, and then almost immediately Apple picked it up. And so I had, I guess probably like November of 2024, I had kind of gotten the heads up about Widow's Bay, and Hero had sent me, like the first three or four scripts, I think, and we sort of just like got, we started the conversation and just sort of like started kind of soft prepping ideas amongst ourselves. Um, and then really, like by when actual prep began, which I think was like it was probably end of February or end of January 25, we had already, read through like probably seven scripts and the rest of the outlines. And we had already had a whole bunch of conversations. So we got like a really great head start on just sort of like conceptualizing what the show wanted to feel like. We really do, I think, going back to your question about language, we really do try so hard to like push each other and ourselves to just really talk, you know, not let cart before the horse kind of like get away from you, which so easily can happen, especially when you're pressed for time and prep. And so we really do value like having this extra time where we just have like kind of big picture philosophical questions about like sculpting what the show is, what it wants to feel like, what the tone is, how does the comedy work, how does the horror work, and then like slowly we sort of like allow that to sift down into more granular conversations about like what does that mean for lighting, what does that mean for camera movement, but we really do try to really spend like an enormous amount of time just kind of like philosophically digesting what the show is, before we get into the nitty gritty.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, to me, I just the show is I think it's perfect. It's like a perfect balance of, horror and comedy, and it's just I mean, it's shockingly great how to me every time I watch it, how well constructed the balance is between the two. Like I've told everybody I know, like, you have to see the show. It's super great. It's so good. It's funny and it's scary and it's perfect. So, like, so tell me a little bit about like, and so each episode, which I also really love, like, kind of is broken down so that it explores like a different sort of type of horror genre. And so, like, tell me a little bit about how you guys approached that and how that came into the discussion. Like, did you guys break it all down really carefully to figure out how you want to do that? And like, what were some of the influences that you had?
So I wish that we could that I could claim that I had like a huge part in all of that. I think I think to Katie's credit, I think that Katie and the writers, I think did a lot of their own sort of like uh, figuring out structurally like what was being referenced and why, and then we then were tasked with sort of like the how. Um, I think there was never an explicit discussion where we were like each episode is going to be referencing like a film or a filmmaker or a subgenre or anything like that. Like I don't think it sort of just like organically occurred. Um, and there was like there was a lot of sort of like conversations about like what was the mask of the mask man? Like what kind of mask was it? Is it a real looking piece of flesh that's stretched over? Is it like some utilitarian object that turned into a mask? There's like those types of big philosophical questions that we sort of like had lots of global conversations about. And I think that in a lot of ways that was us sort of like referencing like, is this too Freddy Krueger? Is this too, like it was us kind of like playing inside the boundaries of the genre. But we certainly never like mapped out a plan for like, oh, this is going to reference this and blah blah blah. There was like, we knew that like Masked Man episode was like specifically very genre forward. We knew that like episode 6, the flashback episode, we knew that that was going to like have a very different aesthetic. Like we had like a roadmap of that sort of thing. But and obviously the pilot has a lot of like sort of like references to like Jaws or The Fog, and then episode 2 there's lots of like classic sort of haunted house tropes. But no, I think ultimately what we tried to do here, and what I think Hiro and I have tried to always do, is like really not letting any of like the style or the approach or anything, you know, uh, letting any of that be for like vanity's sake or for uh, pandering to like an audience or a fan base or anything like that. Like we've really tried so hard to always just make all those decisions really truly motivated by just like what is authentically the truth to the story that we're trying to tell, and like how can we just commit to the story as much as possible. And I think our philosophy is like, if someone is halfway through an episode and they're like, wait a minute, this is an homage to blah blah blah, like you're instantly out of the episode.
Yeah, I didn't find it to be like a specific, but it's just sort of like a, oh, if you've seen this type of movie, it's referencing kind of, that genre. It's not.
Totally.
Yeah, I think you guys did a good job with that.
I do think you were asking about references. I mean, I do think that like with that, the flip side of that is also the show has a lot of comedy elements to it. So then we're like trying to balance like what the brand of comedy is and the style of comedy, and like we had a lot of conversations about sort of like, you know, dry comedy, like, Norwegian comedy, and or like there's lots of conversations about like Coen brothers, like how a Coen brothers beat would play out, or how like, a joke that's there but not being like broadcasted, it's being sort of stepped on and suppressed. So we definitely had lots of that. There was, I think, stylistically, when we got into the nitty gritty of actually like building the show and building the visuals for the show, Cody, who I'm sure we'll get to, but Cody Jacobs, our other DP, he and I really tried to like be sort of co-authors of like what the visual language of the show would be. And then we sort of like had those meetings, came up with a lot of those references, and then sort of like presented them to Hiro and then eventually Katie and Apple, and sort of like philosophically, this is what we kind of see the visuals as. And I think those references were all over the place, but I think there's certainly lots of Coen brothers in there. There's definitely lots of sort of like genre, films of the 70s and 80s. Um, I think very early on, Hiro, we had talked, like one of our very first conversations, he was like, there's something about like modern film or modern television that just has this very like, you know, super unlit kind of like no lighting, and it's just like it's realism achieved by just like almost like docudrama aesthetic. And he was like, I definitely don't think we want to do that. We almost want to like push in the opposite direction, where like something like Jaws, you can feel that it's being shot on like low ISO film stock. You can feel that they're like lighting their exteriors. The shadows are being brought up so that the film stock can perform with these slow lenses that they're probably shooting on it. And he was like, there's something cool about like Jaws or The Shine. Like the first act of The Shining is like ultimately very like bright and kind of like high key. And he was like, there's something like really interesting about that contrast of like things kind of looking bright, and like not everything is being projected as being like this is a spooky tone. And I think that was sort of that kind of became the idea with the comedy, was like there are moments where we're the exterior, there are moments where we're inside like the town hall, where like it just sort of feels utilitarian and sort of like straight. There's like we're not like injecting too much of our agenda as to like how the audience should be feeling, or if they should be like afraid that something scary is about to happen. Like,
There's not like a lot
um,
of moody lighting in City Hall.
yeah, yeah, exactly.
There's moody paintings, though, that's for sure.
Yes, yes. Yeah, lots of good paintings there for sure.
So, actually, speaking of which, like, what were some of the locations you guys shot?
So the show was shot in and around sort of like Metro Boston area. The main town is up north in the Queen Anne's Peninsula, in this town called Rockport. That's sort of like the main basis of where a lot of our like exteriors of like the island's downtown is. And then our stages and a majority of our other kind of like deep inner island, if you will, locations were out west, kind of about an hour and a half west of Boston, in much more sort of rural um, parts of Massachusetts. And then, I mean, a majority of what you see on the show is built sets also, like a fair amount of the interiors, I would say probably 80 to 90% are probably sets.
Talk to me a little bit more about like how you guys kind of struck that balance with the lighting and the comedy and kind of that way. Because I mean, it's still even in the brightly lit stuff, I guess, kind of like Jaws. In the daytime, you still have when he's swimming, you've still got that scary scene where it's bright, but but there's something coming after him. So.
Yeah, yeah. I think in terms of like the comedy stuff, I think if this were a straight drama, I'm sure that our sort of like comedy scenes or like the exterior scenes would probably feel a little bit different than they do. But at the same time, if it were straight comedy, I would assume that we would be like filling in a lot more shadows and like like trying to like always perfectly place people in the right backlight or in the right like exterior lighting scenario, something like that. And I think that like something that I think I sort of like picked up over the years, especially on Atlanta, was there's like a really interesting contrast when you can let things be a little harsher, but then in that harsh, because I think in that harshness you are sort of like conveying this sort of sense of realism and sort of like, I wouldn't say like grittiness, but sort of like just real, that like real life is not that everyone lands in like a perfect 3/4 sun backlight. Like real life is sometimes people are like frontly lit and feel uncomfortable because the sun is in their eyes. And so like, I don't know, I think over time I've come to sort of like maybe be able to use that understanding as that you can use that to your advantage to tell a certain story or like underlying a certain story. Like, you can place one character in a much unfavorable position or direction, where their lighting is doing something that would not be necessarily ideal, and then you can use that in the story depending on which character makes more sense to like have that as the sort of like backstory or underlying tension of the scene.
I mean, I'm thinking of like in episode 9 with is it Rosemary? The one with who's doing the projector, who's showing the
Yeah, yeah,
genealogy, and she's like underlit by the projector,
yeah.
and but she's also smoking, so you kind of get that atmosphere going on,
Yeah,
which
right,
is
right, right.
pretty
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, and I think, or in episode 10, not for, I'm sure the show will be done by the time this comes out, but for episode 10, uh, like the whole, the first act really of episode 10, where there's this kind of like sort of murder story, cat and mouse thing happening with like Tom and Ruth. We sort of like were always placing him in these sort of like edge lit or backlit or like very kind of like garish lighting, and then she was always getting the opposite, like she was always getting this kind of like the soft glow. And once I sort of pitched that concept to Hiro, he was like, oh, I love that, like, and then it became almost like a game for us, like, oh, let's give her like this, there's this soft light source coming from here, so let's put her in this position. And I think that goes back again to that sort of like shorthand and that language that you can build over the years. Because I think Hero, I think it would be completely understandable if I pitched that to a director and they were like, I don't know, I feel like let's not do that. But I feel like because there's this sort of mutual trust, and also Hero knows that like when I pitch an idea like that, I'm not going to go overboard. I'm not going to like overshadow what the actual story is. It's sort of just like one extra little wink that we can kind of like place into, the scene or the feeling of the scene. And yeah, because we've done this, many times over the years, and we've had we've played this game before in scenes, that, he's totally on board to do those types of things.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
and probably some of your work with like on Mr. and Mrs. Smith probably helped with that too.
yeah, yeah, yeah. We definitely played around with a lot of that stuff.
I like that show a lot. Um, so then, like, as far as episode 6, which,
Mm.
is like the standalone kind of episode, tell me a little bit about that. And is that like your favorite one, or did you?
I would say it's one of my favorites. I really think episode 9 is terrific, and I'm very happy and proud of how episode 9 came out. But I love episode 6, and I think from the get go, I had read episode 6 like probably, I don't know, 6 months before we actually, 6 or 7 months before we actually shot it. So episode 6 was like the last episode that we made, because we let all the actors go home. We tore down half of our sets, and then we sort of like almost started from scratch, like almost like a new production. Um, but episode 6 was, very fun for many reasons, but specifically for like me and my departments. It was sort of like we were making a version of the show that we had been making all year, but then we were like changing the whole recipe of it. So it was like we were sort of like trying to maintain the philosophy of what we were doing, but like doing it with like all new tools and a totally new approach and a new director.
Yeah, and it
And
was Ty West. So,
Ty West, yeah.
and then yeah, so talk to me a little bit about like you changed the aspect ratio and the lensing and the cameras, and so yeah, tell me a little bit about.
Yeah, so I had pitched originally to Hero, us. I had done some tests with the Alexa 235, which had just kind of been announced, and some friends at Airy invited me over for this like little sort of sneak peek of the camera, and I was like, oh man, I would love to just shoot the whole season on the show. And I had pitched that to Hiro, and he was like, I don't know if it makes sense to like use a large format camera for this show specifically. Um, but he was like, but it might be really cool if we just used it for episode 6. We had done something similar to this on season 3 of Atlanta, where 3 and 4, I guess, where we sort of had these like standalone episodes in season 3, and that were like completely separate from the show, but they sort of like philosophically fit into what the season represented, and there were these like short films almost, and we had changed into LF, like a full frame sensor, and changed lenses, and it was just sort of, again, like not anything like super noticeable, but just something kind of like fun to sort of subjectively set the episode apart. And so I loved that idea, and I was like, that's great. And I was like, I also would love to maybe conceive it as a different aspect ratio. And so we landed on 1:4:3, which is like 4:3 but IMAX version of 4:3. Um, and so anyway, and then these lenses, I have this like great friendship with Brad Wilson, who's the one of the heads of Keslow Camera. And he, I had been telling him that we were going to be doing this one, like, large format episode. And I was like, what do you think about lensing? Like, what does Keslow have to offer in terms of 65 mil glass? And he was like, there's this like secret project happening right now, with the ASC and this company Zero Optic, who I've known and worked with over the years. And they had rehoused the set of OM Zoico lenses that we were currently filming on. And he was like, it's kind of top secret, but I wonder if this might be something like right up your alley. And so uh, I basically kind of committed to these lenses like sight unseen, and just kind of through the trust of like, trusting Zero's builds, trusting Brad, and Brad knowing kind of like aesthetically what I tend to rent, lens wise. And then they were like, also, we're going to send the lenses to London, and Greg Fraser is going to custom like tune them with the lens designer. And I was like, all right, let me just shoot on these lenses. So anyway, the lenses literally like got finished and then were like shipped to our set. We were like the very first production in 50 something years that got to use these lenses.
Did you get to
And
do any testing or not really?
we had like half a day of testing, which I was not available for because I was filming. So we literally had like we had brought in like a B camera team who just I was like, here are all the tests I need you to do. Like I need veiling tests, I need lens flare tests, I need like contrast tests. We need to check the color balance of each lens against each other. And I had like just this laundry list of testing, and then I would just like pop down, how's the testing going? Great. And then at the end of the night, I sat with the DIT and we just reviewed all of the camera tests, just so that I like had a rough idea of like what I was getting myself into. But they were amazing, and I was like thrilled with how they looked. But when Ty came to prep his episode, Ty has like a lot of cinematography experience. He's shot a lot of his own films. He's operated on a lot of his own films. He knows a ton about, I mean, he's a phenomenally intelligent guy. And he was like, I want to shoot on this camera and I want to shoot on these lenses and I have all these crazy ideas. And I was like, I'm so sorry, but we already kind of made all these decisions and like we already cut the deals and the gear is already here and we can't do that. I'm sorry. And I like felt so nervous because like the worst thing that a DP can do to an incoming director is be like, no. But to Ty's credit, he was like, totally understand. And he just like yes and did that. And came up with like, okay, great. This is the sandbox. I understand what the sandbox is. Like, this is how we're going to play within these new boundaries. And he was like incredibly gracious and just an amazing collaborator and totally understood, that we weren't doing that to offend him. We were doing it because it was like a global conversation that we had already had like, months prior. And yeah, and it was, like he was like, I want to be handheld. I want to be physically very close to, Betty, almost at all times, just to like feel like we're on the ride with her and that we're experiencing this crazy world from her perspective. and it was great. It was like exactly what you want a director to do when they show up as a guest on your show, which is like respect what you has already been built for them and then like completely elevate it and make it like so much better and greater. And I think that that episode too like benefits so greatly from Ty having such a strong understanding of like how horror works. I think he was like really truly like our only like forward director, and I think that episode it just benefits so greatly. It's such a like haunting episode, but also like so fun, and it still is funny, and you know like they did he did like really kind of understand the assignment and nail it.
Yeah. No, I love Betty Gilpin too, and I loved Glow,
Yeah,
and I know you worked on that a little also. It was a great show.
yeah,
So
yeah,
but yeah, again, I mean, nailed it with, it being scary but still funny, It
yeah,
was really good.
yeah, yeah. And I remember in Ty's episode, like we had many conversations about like how because Betty is such an incredible performer and is so funny. And I remember like Ty and Betty sort of sitting there and like in live, like on set, like calibrating how funny the joke was, how big her reaction was, like what what we were trying to get out of that moment. It was like such an interesting process, and I think Ty fully understood like if you are too jokey then you're making like a farcical slapstick thing, and if you're not jokey at all then the whole like premise of the show kind of falls apart. If you have an audience that's like hanging on to the horror because there's some funny stuff happening and they can kind of balance it out, and if you just like serve them pure uncut scary horror you're gonna like alienate people. And so like he fully understood like that razor's edge of like how do we like teeter and walk the tightrope, you know.
Right. It was great. Yeah, I mean, yeah, the same with, the episode in the hotel with
Yeah.
um I mean, I just yeah, I'm like, "Oh god, now we're getting into it." Oh my. And then
Yeah.
it was like suddenly it's funny again. Okay, great. I'm pretty much a wimp when it comes to horror personally. But
Yeah, I heard a lot of people say that they bailed after the clown in episode 2. They're like, can't do the show. I was like, oh come on, that's like the scariest moment in the whole show.
it was fine. I got over it.
Yeah.
So tell me a little bit then about your collaboration with
Cody Jacobs, yeah, yeah.
because you guys have worked together quite a bit as well.
So Cody was has is one of my closest friends, and we've known each other since film school. And we both kind of moved out to Los Angeles together with a small group of fellow students, and we all kind of worked for each other and with each other and crewed on various things. And it, you know, in school, Cody had kind of started working as my gaffer. And when we got out to Los Angeles, like I had gotten on a TV show. I had done a pilot and then a season 1 of a show that like flipped into the union that he was gaffing, and then we all joined union in our respected job titles, and he joined as a gaffer and I joined as a DP. And so we basically have worked for, you know, almost 2 decades together, collaborating as DP and gaffer. And then on Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I directed episode 4, and I asked him to shoot it because deep down secretly I always knew that he was like an incredible cinematographer, which makes the best gaffers. Of course, every DP knows secretly that like the best gaffers are those who like really want to
Yeah.
become DPs.
I know
Except
a lot
that
of
the
gaffers become DPs.
right. Yeah, and the worst part of that is that eventually they will become a DP, and then they'll beat you out for jobs, and then they'll overtake you, and but he's just an incredible filmmaker first and foremost, and you know has an amazing eye for lighting and for composition and just cinematography in general, and and also he knows Hiro and mine's sort of playbook probably more intimately than like any other crew member ultimately. Like, he has been there every step of the way. We brought him to Cuba and made this film in Cuba together, and he was like there, with dysentery, just like we were. And, you know, he he's really truly been through all the trenches. And so, we had interviewed a whole bunch of like really truly incredible cinematographers to come in and do these 4 other episodes. And then Hiro and I just kind of had a conversation where he was like, "Does it just make sense for us to like spiritually, does it just make sense for us to just like promote from within?" Because we had done this with a few of our editors as well, where they sort of started it as editing assistants, and then sort of like now our editors, and and yeah, and it was an incredible thing for me ultimately because or for both here of Cody and I, because ultimately we both got to continue the language that we've built and our collaboration that we've had for almost 20 years, and we've just gotten to expand that, and his role has gotten to increase, but the conversation is basically the same. Like, he and I have always been talking about like contrast ratios and lighting direction and the types of lights that we should be using, and what type of diffusion we're using outside, and what our philosophies are for night exterior lighting, all this type of stuff. It was just that he had more like authorship in the decision making, and I think that his episodes. So he shot
I
episode
mean, the beach
four,
read,
5.
yeah,
Oh yeah, beach is like one of
is
those
great.
really
And it's
stunning.
amazing. Yeah, the talk about, yeah, that was lit so well with all the night stuff, and that was one of my favorite episodes for sure.
Yeah, I truly think, episode 5 has like such incredible like cinematography, just top to bottom. It is like doing so much wacky heavy lifting with the like lenses and lighting, and it's so fun. And then episode 7, which is largely on that boat, which was one of the biggest hurdles of the show, is obviously the fact that a lot of the show takes place out on the ocean at night, and that's a big conundrum because, are you going out on the ocean? Are you, like, how much are you then having to rely on a marine department? And that obviously slows things down. And if we're not on an ocean and we're doing it on stage, how are we shaking the boat? How are we making it feel real? And, ultimately, like, that was a major, major challenge. And I think that they absolutely delivered it. And then, like you were saying earlier, episode 8, which I also think is like visually one of the most stunning episodes. um so he got all the really good scripts, and they look really good. And no, I couldn't feel more fortunate to get to make this show with him, and I truly do feel that I owe, half of any success that I have from this is totally because of all of his hard work, and the fact that he was a part of it. So it was a real special one.
Hmm. So did you guys like kind of sit down and create a lookbook together and kind of do a lot of discussion together?
Yeah. Yeah. So basically, what we sort of started with was we just, we've always kind of prepped this way where like I'll just dump tons and tons of reference images and artwork and photographs and clips from movies and stills and whatnot, and it's sort of just in this massive unorganized mess, and then slowly over time it starts to become organized and categorized and sifted through. And so we basically did that process, but we did it concurrently. And what we ended up doing was doing a shared freeform board, which is an app that everybody has on their Mac computer, where essentially, it was like a shared document, and we just like vomited tons of ideas. And, you can just like write notes and put stickies and draw things. And so we were just sort of like, we were using it as like a giant digital whiteboard for all of prep. And I prepped the show for, I don't know, 6 or 8 weeks, and then he came in and he got like 2 or 3 weeks. So we sort of like did a lot of that stuff, kind of like behind closed doors secretly while he was not, well, before his prep really began. But it was really just us it was a way for us to kind of communicate and have conversations and talk about like philosophically how we wanted to approach things. And then yeah, and then slowly that kind of like over the course of all of both of our preps, that kind of got organized into like this is kind of like the general idea of what day exteriors look and feel like, and then this is what night exteriors look and feel like, and then that was then used to have discussions with like the Grip Electric team. Our gaffer would sit down and we would kind of like have like presentations where we would sort of like do we would do like we would do a sit down meeting where we'd go through images and point to them and in a slideshow fashion and talk about like this is what we're planning for here, blah blah blah. And then it also became really helpful, you know, it became really helpful just to communicate to other departments. Episode 9, for example, the opening of episode 9 when we find the continuation of the end of episode 6 where we find the family out in the ocean on the boat. Originally that was written as like night exterior. They're being lit by this one single lantern, and this like whole scene happens. And I just like up from day one, I was like, this is gonna be really hard for us to like make look good and believable and like keep the drama of it if it's like all dark and there's just this one little glowing light. And I was like, I wonder if it's just this like super thick fog since it's all about fog anyway. And and so I had built like basically a sub look. We started building like sub lookbooks. I built like a sub lookbook and did like a whole prep presentation to like the producers and the art department. I was like, I'm proposing a complete change in narrative structure or in like narrative design, but I was like, what if? And because then we had to like build a different type of water tank, and we had to like bring on a huge special effects team for fog, and it meant a lot of visual effects and blah blah blah. But just having all there has to be some sort of like place where all of those like visual references start and come from. And yeah, it was really cool that we could author that together. And the same thing with like when we got into color correction, we built a full nother lookbook just for the color grade and what does the grain feel like and what does the halation on the highlight red channel feel like. Like we basically just always had references to be discussing and looking at and sort of like debating.
Great. Well, I mean, I think the fog really worked. I mean,
Yeah,
for the
yeah, yeah.
episode.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I really like that scene a lot. I
I
think it
it
was
was yeah, it felt
great.
like a callback to, the first episode.
I think the show does not give enough credit to the visual effects team because they've done such a tremendous job of making all of their work seem purely invisible. But like the amount of seamless, incredible VFX that were like pulled off on the show, like just the fact that like a majority of our locations are like hours apart from each other, and that like the visual effects team was the reason that it all feels like one place. Or like the foggy ocean, for example, like there's very strict studio rules against like children being in practical fog, so like a lot of those shots were shot practical, like super thick practical haze, and then some shots we were not allowed to use any haze because of the age of the children. So like the visual effects team just did an absolute outstanding job of like matching that stuff and making everything feel cohesive. And I always like panic when something is like, oh, this is going to get turned over to VFX and they'll figure it out, and that's like the scariest thing in the world to tell a DP. But in this circumstance, like those guys just did absolutely amazing work.
Well, for yourself, did you do any, is there any particular like visual effects that you did in camera that you're really proud of?
I'm trying to think. I mean, I think like I would say maybe like episode 9, the sequence of them of Loftus going out in the storm, driving to the storm, going up into the lighthouse, and then realizing that Garrett was back at the town hall. That sequence was done almost entirely practical in every sense, in every possible way. I think there was maybe a shot where we like painted in a lighthouse into one shot, and then there was some like visual effects wide shots where we sort of added some storm. But like the shots of him driving in the car are literally him on a black stage with like rotating trees in the background, and the we built a replica of the top of the lighthouse and shot that all out in a parking lot, and like all of those weather effects except for the like crazy storm clouds, like all those weather
Oh yeah,
effects
and
are
like the
practical.
tornado.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and like all of that stuff is like, I think our philosophy was like try as hard as humanly possible to get everything to be practical and in camera, and then we'll use vis effects to like just barely clean up the edges and stitch things together. And I think to the dismay of our producers, because I think our line producer specifically just like couldn't wrap her head around a lot of times when we were like, no, it has to be done practical. We had to spend so much money on this really dumb joke. And I think there were so many there was so many opportunities to just be like, this could just be VFX. Like we had to build, I think we had in that sequence, there's like him running up this spiral staircase, and it was like, I don't know, $100,000 set to build for this like one shot, and we just were like, and the poor line producer was like, please, is there any way that we could just like shoot it on stairs and then green screen it? And we were like, no, it has to be real. And but I do think that like that commitment to the realism and the commitment to that style of filmmaking is also what makes the show feel special, and like kind of hopefully sets the show apart a little bit from like
It totally sold it. It was great. I really like that. That was funny.
yeah. Yeah, we often talk about like how, I don't know if that's become like a brand of ours, but like really overcommitting something very serious, like a very serious amount of work to something that is like very clearly like so dumb. And there's some, I don't know, there's something that like philosophically, I think we both really like that concept of like, I don't know what it is, but I feel like we did that several times in Atlanta. We were like,
Yeah, I mean, isn't that just everything entertainment?
yeah, yeah, exactly. And yeah, and I think if you phone it in, I think that audience feels that immediately, like I think there's like a subjective, even like an untrained audience, I think there's like a subjective understanding of like, whoa, this is being done, like there's so much craft being put into this, like I'm going to respect it even though it's like clearly a silly joke. I don't know, there's like that tension is really interesting.
Well, it does more than that. I mean, it sets the stage too for what's happening with all the weather, and I mean, it's the
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
atmosphere.
Yeah.
It's
Yes.
it's got more than one goal.
Yeah, exactly, it's worth it.
So, as so you're credited as a producer on Widow's Bay. How does that change your relationship to what happens on the show?
So I started joining the process as a producer on season 3 of Atlanta, and then worked as a producer on Mr. and Mrs. Smith as well. Um, I don't. I often wonder if it actually changes anything, or if it really just like is a an extra title for like something I've always been doing or always been involved in. Like I have, I do think that like I am very deeply creatively involved in pre-production far earlier than a DP normally is. Like we're having creative conversations, and we're like building crew and talking about like what producers we want, what production designer we want. Like I'm having those conversations like months and months before we get into pre-production. And on this show, I was also going to, creative meetings about episodes that I wasn't shooting, and we were just sort of having big picture philosophical conversations. And then, in post production, I they're very graciously sort of like folding me into the process of seeing cuts and talking about kind of like globally what the show is. On Mr. and Mrs. Smith, I'd also directed an episode, so I was in post for that episode, but then I sort of like ended up having lots of sitting in on lots of kind of big picture creative meetings on like what that show wanted to be as we were sort of figuring out what season one of a show is. And then with visual effects specifically, um, I think selfishly, I think visual effects has so much influence over, the cinematography and the visuals of something, um, that I really try to embed myself in as many ways as possible into the visual effects conversations about, reviews and giving notes and, I sit in on literally all of the visual effects like color sessions. And then we pretty much do supervised grading for the whole series. So, Damien, our colorist, and I will sit there and pretty much go through the whole show together. Obviously Cody colors his episodes, but I've essentially kind of like seen and, I guess to some extent blessed everything that goes out as our show. Um, so so I don't know, but I also feel like I do all that stuff as a DP. I will I will offer those services as a DP regardless. Yeah, so maybe it's, and I think that like look, I think that a lot of DPs in television, I know a lot of DPs in television that go way above and beyond and put a lot of this extra sort of like uncredited, unpaid work into something to make it excellent. And on the flip side, I'm sure there's a much more peaceful existence where I just like show up, design the look, we shoot the episode, and then I like do 6 hours of color grade at the end, and I could probably do like 10 of those shows a year. Um, but I don't know. I think I've always sort of like tried to conceptualize my role as a DP in television as I would if it was a feature film, and it were a feature film that I like truly and honestly like believed in and cared about. And I think that like there is, I don't know, I just feel like a very strong level of dedication to the things that I like sign up for. And I if I do something, I want to do it to the best of my ability. And I don't know, maybe it's a control freak thing. I don't know.
No,
But
I think it's true. I think the lines are a little more blurred with television than they are like with movies.
yeah,
I was a television producer for many years too, and it was definitely reality though, not scripted, which is totally different. But it's the
yeah,
same kind of thing though, where you have, multiple jobs basically. It's kind of all
yeah.
blurs together.
Yeah, and the other thing I would say is that like Hiro, he is such an incredible collaborator as a filmmaker, and that like we really have all kind of like built this like sort of community and family that we've all like made all of the like hero things together. And I think that like he understands that like we're all committed to making his stuff the best that it can possibly be, and the reward is that we all just get to keep doing that together as a team and as a family. And like Caitlin Waldron, who's our like the world's greatest post producer, she's become a producer as well. And so like Caitlin and I both have sort of like stepped up from our normal roles and like also been folded into as producers onto these projects because I think we are part of what the hero thing is, and I think that in some way is just sort of a nod to us and to studios that like this, when you're hiring hero, you are going to exclusively get like the top shelf quality end product. So yeah, it's been great, and I really enjoy being a part of a lot of those bigger conversations. It's been really cool. The last thing to say would just be like, I think major uh, respect and major kudos to Katie Dippold for kind of understanding this show as something that could be multiple things, and like trusting us to make it the way that we made it, and also to Apple for being willing to spend a bunch of money to do something that, like, I don't know if anybody fully believed would work. Maybe, but I think there was a lot of question in our mind of like,
I think it's become a big hit. I mean, everybody seems to
oh
really
no,
love
absolutely.
it.
Absolutely. But I think when we were making it, I think the sentiment was kind of like, yeah, like there will be some people that will like this. Like, I don't think that I don't think anybody, I don't know if anyone ever knows if something's going to be a hit or not,
No.
but I think that like we felt like we were making a very weird show. And I think, we sort of figured like, yeah, it might get like a cool like cult following, or, there might be some fans out there, but I don't think we expected it to like end up as the, whatever number one show on Apple streaming. So, but truly, to Apple's credit, like I think they were very supportive of us sort of taking these kind of like big swings and making the show the way we did. And yeah, I think it is so rare when all the stars align like that. But it was a special one.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good job, and you should be proud. It was really great.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
sure. And thanks so much for coming on the show.
Yeah, absolutely. This is great. Great talking to you. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so that was Christian Sprenger. Hey, thank you so much for being on the podcast, and can't wait to see season 2 of
Yeah,
Widow's
thank you
Bay.
for Widow's Bay. Holy crap, one of the best shows on television. Oh my god.
We all loved it. I was very excited to speak with them about it. It was great. I hope everyone enjoyed the interview.
And one interesting thing about Widow's Bay is that it's a show that they released week by week. They didn't dump the whole series all at once, and their viewership went up every week, as if doing a model like that, like maybe Instagram can learn from that too. Not only if you turn your video horizontal, people might watch it, but if you release it week by week, and then they could like have Geritol sponsor it, and they could have anyway.
Well, and it was interesting because I think that did work too, because also I saw lots of people talking about it on Instagram all the
That's
time.
what I mean, like
spread like crazy by word of mouth.
Everybody I know was telling me, you got to check out Widow's Bay. This is a show that you would love. And what's funny is like it's a show that kind of everyone would love. It's it may be a more accessible kind of Twin Peaks kind of a thing, where it's like the location is kind of the character. Well, let's get into our short ends. Alana, since you're not here with us doing this all the time, I think you should give us your short end first.
My short end is living in the Pacific Northwest. The stop motion animation studio Leica is a pretty big deal. And they have a new movie that's coming out in the fall called Wildwood.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've seen the trailer. And, like a lot of Leica stuff, it looks good, but it seems to be pretty dark, just like a lot of the stuff that they do. And I really enjoy following Leica on Instagram and on LinkedIn too, because they show a lot of their process videos. So it's really cool to like see all the art and just the process of putting all the stop motion together. So it's not out yet, but it's supposed to be coming in October of 2026.
Oh, sweet.
A stop motion film called Wildwood. So I'll put a link to the trailer in the show notes if anyone wants to check it out.
All right, Ben, how about you? What is your short end this week?
My short end is a movie that you might still be able to see in your local theater that I think is not for everyone. I'll preface it with that. It's called The Furious, and it is the most insane martial arts. I don't know which martial art, so I'm not going to open up my mouth and say something stupid, but it's like a lot of fighting, and it's sort of like Taken meets The Raid Redemption meets John Wick. It's just as the title would imply, furious. It's this guy gets his daughter stolen by these human traffickers, and then gets her back by fist fighting about 5,000 people and joining another guy who's doing a similar thing. And the fights are insane. It's pretty bloody. It's directed by a man named Kenji Tanigaki. And the DP, I actually reached out to the DP. Meteor Chung is the DP. And I don't know if we can get Meteor on the show. But man, oh man, this movie is never boring. It's got some of the most impressive fight choreography. You'll see some familiar faces from the Raid Redemption kind of stuff and some other movies in that kind of genre. Is it meaningful drama that's going to move you to tears? No. But it looks great. The fights are just outrageously insane. I feel like also there's like a George Miller influence in the way it's edited, in the way it's framed.
I think I heard comparisons too to RRR. Do you remember?
Yes, I can see that. And like, if I have a complaint about it, it's that it becomes too much of a good thing at a certain point, because you watch some of these fight scenes and you're like, I miss the part where these people all have superpowers and can get hit in the face with a sledgehammer and keep going, because that's what just happened. It was just a blast. I would see it again. It's so good.
Dynamite.
How about you, Ilya? What is your little obsession this week? Your little tiny little obsession. Impress me with your acumen. Go ahead.
All right. So my short end this week, Ben, is something that you sent me. You sent me a story about the new Dungeon Crawler Carl television series. Essentially, they are taking the book series, and Peacock has ordered a series from Seth MacFarlane's Fuzzy Door. And it's going to be written by Christopher Yost, who, of course, did Taika Waititi's Thor Ragnarok and tons of other animated and motion picture style projects and comic book stuff. So it's got a huge, great team behind it. And this is one of the most popular, book series currently out in the world, and boy, the audiobooks are just like tearing up the charts. So thank you, Ben, for sending me my latest obsession, which is going to be this show. I don't know when it's going to officially come into the world, but it's being announced at Comic-Con in a couple of weeks, so it'll be a big deal.
Yeah. Well, when I saw that headline, you were the first person I thought of, because you've been telling me about that for months.
Yeah, it's going to be great. Well, all the ingredients are lining up to make it great, so I hope it is. All right, so that just about does it for this show. Alana, where can people find you?
You can find me at Green Tree Creative, which is growwithgreentree.com, which is my marketing, social media marketing, kind of podcasting company. I do some things for some nonprofits for their social media marketing. So if you're interested in starting a podcast or getting some social media marketing, you can reach out.
All right, great. Ben, where can people find you?
You can find me at benrock.com. You can't find any boats there anymore, unfortunately, but you can find me there. Check out my reel, look at my socials, read my bio. Hasn't really changed much, but I've got some stuff coming up, so there will be new content on there pretty soon. How about yourself, Ilya? Where can people find you?
You can find me at Hot Rod Cameras, hotrodcameras.com, if you need cameras, lenses, lighting, post-production, hard drives, flash drives, camera cards, anything like that. Let us know. We can help over at Hot Rod Cameras.
Camera
All
cards?
Right. Camera cards, of course. We got those.
And you've got those new motorized camera card thing.
We got the zipper cart. Yeah, the zipper cart's super cool. Goes really fast. Who do we have to thank? Who made this show possible today?
Well, first we should thank Hayes Alatrachi, who created all of the music that you heard in the show today. And you can find Hayes at kayslabs.com, where they are fixing synthesizers. So you can contact them if you want your synthesizer fixed by any chance. And also follow Kays on YouTube, where Kays will show fixing synthesizers.
Yeah.
So
yeah, also Kays Labs on YouTube.
Also Kays Labs on YouTube. So check it out.
Is that the only person we have to thank?
Well, there's one more person.
I mean, how am I going to thank myself?
And thank you to myself for doing all this hard work. to
Yeah.
make sure that the show works.
You're welcome. You're welcome.
You're welcome, you two.
On great
All right,
shirts.
all right.
Yeah, yeah, in grades.
Yes, you're welcome for producing the show and editing the show and booking all the guests, getting this shit done. So we put an episode out every week and 2 last week.
Whoa.
Who's gonna take us out?
Oh, I think it's you.
All right. Well, I guess I will say thanks for tuning in.
Woohoo! This has been Cinepod, the cinematography podcast presented by Hot Rod Cameras. Find your next camera, lens, or accessory at hotrodcameras.com. Watch and subscribe to our show on YouTube or listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow and interact with us on Instagram, Threads, Facebook, Blue Sky, and LinkedIn. But not X. Don't do that. Thanks for tuning in.